And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Thursday morning's flying weather looks like this, at least the forecast for Thursday morning's flying weather. IFR here along the west coast, eastern Bering Sea, eastern Aleutians into the Alaska Peninsula, followed by a little bit of marginal VFR, Atka Island, IFR, ADAC westward. Some pretty good VFR over the interior, but marginal VFR starting to move in with that low pressure area into the Gulf of Alaska. That's going to push IFR up along all the North Gulf Coast and eventually into Prince William Sound and across the Panhandle. And then for the afternoon hours, IFR slips on up into northern Cook Inlet and the Manauskas-Susitna Valley into portions of the Copper River Basin, and then extends down across Yakutat into the Panhandle. IFR here, southwest coast, Bristol Bay, Alaska Peninsula, Pribilofs into the central Bering Sea, and along most of the Aleutians, or just to the south. And then marginal VFR here over the western interior, central and northern part of the state, east central northern areas. VFR, except some marginal VFR possible along the eastern Arctic coast in the afternoon. And then that turns into a pretty good solid area of IFR for the central eastern Arctic coast, now into the North Slope, with marginal VFR central western interior, mostly VFR on the east side, and then areas of marginal VFR for south central Alaska, Copper River Basin, and the North Gulf Coast into the Panhandle, mostly IFR, and some IFR here up into southwestern Kodiak Island and the Aleutian Range. Out to the west, less in the way of IFR, still a band out here, near the Pribilofs, northward to St. Lawrence Island, marginal VFR, Alaska Peninsula, all of the Aleutians. And for the afternoon, IFR, St. Matthew Island along the southwest coast of Nunivak Island, marginal for the Pribilofs to the eastern Aleutians, Alaska Peninsula, IFR in the central Aleutians. Some IFR here, portions of the Koyukuk Valley into the Kobuk Valley, and then marginal VFR for the western part of the state into the Kuskokwim Valley. VFR, central interior to the Canadian border down to the Copper River Basin, and maybe some VFR breaking out over the Susitna Valley and Cook Inlet, kind of marginal for the Manauskas Valley, with IFR pretty well entrenched now for the afternoon on Friday over Bristol Bay, Prince William Sound, and down across Kodiak Island into the southern Kuskokwim Valley, northeastern Bristol Bay, and IFR for the eastern Panhandle. Passes tomorrow, Anaktuvik and Adigan, looking pretty good up there. VFR the entire day for both passes. Not too bad for the Brooks Range. And for the western Alaska Range, marginal VFR for Lake Clark and Merrill. Rainy, same forecast. Windy, VFR trending toward marginal VFR. Conditions lowering, deteriorating throughout the day, especially in the afternoon hours. And that same forecast good for both Isabel and Mentasta. Tanita, marginal VFR becoming IFR during the midday hours. And Portage, IFR from start to finish, and probably the lower conditions in the afternoon, possibly going low IFR for Portage here on the eastern entrance. And then for Chilkoot and White, IFR. Freezing levels, chilly air coming southward on northerly winds aloft and at the surface, about 4,000 feet well south of the Alaska Peninsula, and roughly about 4,000 feet, 3,000 to 4,000 over the western interior, 4,000 to 5,000 on the east side there, and about 4,000 to 10,000 feet across the southeast coast, and much warmer conditions out here over the central and western Aleutians, looking at 10,000 or 12,000 foot freezing levels there. Icing, look for some considerable moderate rime icing from Atka Island tomorrow into the eastern Aleutians, as well as the eastern North Gulf Coast and the Panhandle. And for the jet stream at 33,000 feet, south to north flow here, strongest right across near Yakutat, 130 knots out of the south. Lighter winds over the interior, and then a pretty good west-northwesterly jet cutting across the central and southern Bering Sea, up to 160 knots, diminishing here over the eastern Aleutians down to about 105 knots. And for 9,000 feet, west-northwest flow here, up to 70 knots there for the Aleutians. Lighter up to the north here, lighter over the interior. South winds 50 knots, eastern Copper River Basin. And for the Panhandle, even stronger winds out of the south-southwest, 60 knots across that area. 3,000 feet, looking at southerlies 55 knots, mainly over the central and southern southeast coast. Lighter winds over interior Alaska and a lot more variable. And then out here over the western Bering, northwest flow, 35 to 40 knots, kicking up to about 65 knots there near Atka Island. Turbulence, moderate turbulence here, well, west of Nikolsky, actually from about Atka all the way out to Shimianatu, much lighter over the western interior. Northern Bering Sea, nothing significant. North Gulf Coast, so moderate turbulence there, as well as the panhandle, around surface to 6,000 feet or so.